Please welcome D A Pennebaker. You were a great theater fan. Am I right?
Who fan?
A fan of theater. Of.
Well, then I wasn't. I was kind of an asshole. I'm not sure what I was, but I thought I was going to be an engineer, which turned out to be a fantasy. And I was an engineer for a couple of years, and then I quit. And
Let me ask you about that. Did you have a passion for engineering, or were you doing engineering because you thought it was a smart thing to do?
I wanted something I could do to earn some money. I didn't have any money. When I got through Yale, I was really broke, and I thought engineering would be I mean, I liked had an erector set when I was little, and I liked putting it together. So I thought that was kind of engineering, and I was good at math. So it seemed to me a reasonable thing to do for a living. But I tried it for about 6 months, and I was so bored. I was sitting in the can reading science fiction when I was supposed to be building a big power station out in Texas somewhere, which I never saw. So I knew I shouldn't do that, and my roommate, one of my roommates, Bill Gaddis, said, "You got to quit."
Bill Gaddis, meaning William Gaddis, one of the great 20th century novels.
Right.
It's a kind of theme of Pennebaker's life that's like people just like, oh, and Robert Kennedy when I was filming with him, and.
Well, he was young then too, and he was still working on his book. I think he would have had 8 years on that book. But I said, well, Willie, if I quit, I can't. How am I going to pay my share of the rent? We were sharing an apartment on Horatio Street, and he said, that's what you'll learn to do. And he was right. The best training, if you want to be a filmmaker, is to quit your job and survive and find a camera somewhere. That was it, yeah.
And so now we're talking about this is the early 1950s.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yes, 50s.
And I think you once told me that Francis Thompson's film New York, New York had made an early impression on you.
Well, I helped him make it. That is, I drove the car, and but at the time I helped him. It was all done with little devices that we made to make abstractions on the screen with the camera, and we would take a piece of a mirror and cut it into little pieces and bend it so that when you shot into it, you got a kind of well, it was like those French pictures, that were very famous then. Anyway, I worked with him for a long time, and what I learned, which I should have learned when I was taking my engineering degree, but I totally paid no attention really to what I should have learned. But what I realized is that he was a genuine artist. I thought artists, when I was in engineering, were people that drew pictures. And when I found out from Francis, they were people that never gave up. And that made a big impression on me. And when I finally saw, and I wanted to be all kinds of things, I wanted to be a writer and a painter, and I knew writers and painters who were so much better than I ever could be that I thought, why waste their time and my time? And when I saw the first rough kind of assembly, of the first really projection of NY, which was Francis's film, I thought, holy shit, he's done this all by himself. I can do that. And that was it. And the rest of my life was, from then on, downhill or uphill, one way or the other.
What was the moment that you knew you were good at filmmaking?
Well, you didn't have to be good. You just had to be happy doing it. Being good was somebody else's problem. There was no... what I was doing, there was absolutely no market for it. Television had hardly been invented then. We didn't even have tape to put sound on. We had to put wire or do it on optical track. It was all such a new kind of practice. It had a quality of being a witch's brew of some sort. I knew two things. I knew that the music that I happened to like, which was jazz, and which I had records to prove that I liked it, I could listen to them. I knew that music was really an important thing that was going on and had been going on in this country in our time, and that somehow if I could find a way to make films that sort of were made like that music was made. That is, the thing about jazz that's so fantastic, two things. One, it was done on 78 records, which are about 3 minutes long. So whatever the ideas were musically, they had to be condensed, squeezed together till they were almost perfect. And when you listen to some of those early records, they were just, some of them were fantastic, and the musicians on them were fantastic too, even though they were kind of squandering their lives on playing in bars and not being recognized for what they were, I think, in many ways. But that music taught me, those records taught me how to make a film, how to squeeze it down material and put it together in some way that would just fly. I had known Elaine before, and Elaine was sort of an interesting person to know. She was exactly like my first wife, and the two of them would get on opposite sides of a room in a party and just look at each other and try to figure out what the other was up to. So she kind of was interesting to me in some way, and if you dated her and took her out, you had to walk. You couldn't take her home in a cab. You had to walk her home wherever you were. She always walked everywhere in New York. But she was like, for me, because I'm a totally driven by music of the early music, 30s and 40s, the Rodgers and Hart, the whole kind of music scene then. She knew it instinctively. I mean, it was like it would come out of her. And whenever you listen to music with her, she knew right away something about it that I wanted to know and didn't. So I paid a lot of attention to her. And I know when I watched this film, I hadn't seen it for a long time. And I remember when I was filming her in the Ladies Who Lunch, and I was nervous because there were these mics all around me, and Thom, who's the little emperor of the place, said, if I hear one noise out of you, you're out. The whole bunch of you are out. And there was only 3 of us there, so it was not a heavy threat. But so I was nervous I was going to bump into one of those mics because I got really so fascinated with watching her face. And it was like I never filmed anything like that before, and haven't since, really. So it was a very meaningful piece of film for me to watch again, I'll tell you. The idea of the film was that we would make these a series of every musical that came along. We would do one of these films and put it on television. Only television wasn't too eager. I think the cost of the music was high for them, or whatever. They didn't really, they had a hard time selling it. So they decided to put it out around the country to independent stations. I was told this is going to be 3 parts, and there'll be advertisements between each part. So I made it like a kind of triptych with 3 different sections, and there were spaces between them for people to put their ads in, whatever. Only I have put them together here so they're one movie. But the idea of it was to sell it that way, and I mean, I'm not sure it's a good form, but I thought it's not really a movie. I mean, I can't expect to sell this to a movie house. So we didn't know what to do with it, so it just lay idle for a bit. I think also I kind of made a comeback with the help of my partner Chris Hedges and with Fraser, in that they kept on top of these things. They didn't let them slide away into oblivion, which a lot of films do. People sometimes would make a film and the original would be in the lab, and they'd make a print from it and they'd take the print out and they'd forget they'd left the original in the lab, and then the lab would fold and the original would disappear, and that would be the end of the film. It's kind of amazing because they were treated like little lost children, you know, in many ways, and a lot of fantastic film is no more. So but it was, in a way, what we discovered was that if you had a sync camera that you could carry around, you could make films almost all by yourself. And that was a kind of an amazing discovery at the time. There were 3 or 4 people in New York that I knew who were all, The Little Fugitive was made that way with Morris.
Morris Engel.
Yeah, and the idea of making a film by yourself was unheard of 10 years before, because you need a big studio full of people and plants and creatures and machines to make films. And of course, what we didn't really appreciate, you also needed a big operation in order to sell them. And by ourselves, you make a film by yourself, it's like making a car in your backyard. What are you going to do with it? Who's going to buy it? It has almost no value at all as films, as you think of films. So it took a while for us to get films sold. I mean, we had to distribute them ourselves.
Thank you very much for coming. Thanks especially to D A Pennebaker.